Greetings. I hope this video finds you well. This will be part 3 in our series on Sermon on the Mount, the random thoughts that I have concerning this wonderful little sermon given by Jesus about how we should all run our lives. So this today will seem pretty familiar, especially if you are into going to church on Ash Wednesday, because it is basically, we're going to be going over the text that we read during Ash Wednesday service. So it's also a section of this that I've preached on a lot, so forgive me if I get a little preachy on some of this. It's kind of the nature of being a pastor, unfortunately. So here we go. Concerning almsgiving, beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So again, this is Matthew 6. It's the question of, why are you doing it? And I'm going to continue reading these next two sections because you'll notice that this idea keeps coming up. So here we did almsgiving, now we'll do prayer. Whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. When you are praying, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, not those Gentiles. For your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Pray then in this way. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we have forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Once again, it's that whole idea, why are you doing it? And you will also recognize that there is something pretty familiar about this passage, and maybe a prayer that we say a lot in church. But once again, it's that question, why are you doing this? And then our final section, which concerns fasting. Whenever you fast, do not look dismal, like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces so as to show others that they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, put oil on your head, wash your face, so that your fasting may be seen not by others, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So as I said, this is all about, why are you doing this devotional type act? And this is a key thing in this. These are all concerning devotional acts towards God. Because there's all sorts of kinds of giving. So you give for, a social organization such as a food pantry, and you're giving to help others. Now, there may be a selfish aspect to that, whether you're doing it to make yourself feel better or something like that. But it is a way to make yourself feel better by giving to make sure you're helping other people. When you're giving to a church, you're you're giving to an organization that may honor those things and may participate and give to those type of things, but it's a focus on God and on faith. And so it is a little bit different. It isn't just a social institution, in that a church's sole focus isn't just to feed the hungry and the poor and to do those things, but that is an outreach of a church. But there's another element to churches, that is this idea of faith formation and changing hearts and minds of people to make them devoted to God. And therefore, there is a different types of acts that people do that are meant to have that different kind of focus. So like if you're working at a food pantry, that is one act that one can do to help benefit others, and it can make a person feel better, as well as help you serve and make another person's life better. But when we get into the idea of devotional acts are this idea of making one right with God. When you are acting and helping a person in need, you're not focusing on making yourself right with God, or at least that shouldn't be your focus. Your focus should be helping that person, helping make sure that there is that healing taking place of whatever you're doing, and in whatever form you're doing. But when you are doing a devotional act, it is about writing your relationship with God. It's about writing or holding on to that relationship with God and making sure that you are remembering God and remembering your faith. And so devotional acts they're very explicit. And if you come from a Roman Catholic tradition where they have do the Hail Marys and various things, as a way of, and even masses. These are acts that hopefully by doing them, it reminds you of your faith and helps strengthen your faith and brings you closer to God in some way, or puts God at a forefront in your mind. And that's the purpose of the act. Now, what Jesus is addressing here, whether it is our giving to churches, whether it is praying at churches, or whether it is doing some other devotional act such as fasting, and fasting was a big thing back in the first century, and in some Christian groups and individuals, fasting is still popular. It's a big thing for Lent. You fast from something during Lent. So all of these acts aren't necessarily done in order to help another person get food or another person get shelter. These are acts for us to relate to God better, to strengthen our faith in God. So when we do these things in a public way, or at least a purposefully public way, are we truly honoring God in why we're doing them? Are we truly doing this for God if we are so focused to show everybody, I give the most at church, I say the coolest prayers, I am the best at fasting because look at me, I have eaten all day and I'm making sure I do everything perfectly. When we look at fasting and our own devotional practices in light of how other people perceive us as being so Christian, then we have missed the point of why we do these things. So often, I have been in a meeting situation where people get so nervous about praying, and they get so bent out of shape that they can't figure out the right words. If you've listened to any of my videos or any of my sermons, you know I constantly can't figure out the right words. The right words get stuck in my throat all the time. They get somewhere back here in my brain and they never come forward. But that isn't having the perfect words, having the perfect understanding of God isn't what it's about. You can pray an imperfect prayer, and God will hear you just as well as a person who meticulously figured out every single word that they would say. Because, quite frankly, God doesn't care about what you say. God cares about what's in your heart. So you might have a problem translating what is in your heart to what you want to say, but God doesn't see that because God knows the purpose behind your words. Now that might make you nervous because you're having to say a prayer in front of other people, and so you're worried that they might misunderstand you. But once again, Jesus is reminding us that it isn't about the other people, it's about God. And if we can't figure out the right words, we can keep it simple, but know that God is in listening to all the thoughts coming out of our head. And that is the purpose of prayer. It's always actually kind of angered me. I'll admit it. Or at least I wouldn't say anger. I check out. If somebody just keeps going on and on and on with a prayer, just like, I love this, love, 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 love. You're great, 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 great. It's like, oh, come on. Calm down. God knows you love him. God knows that you are a great person. You don't have to pile on all these little things and going on for like 20 minutes. It makes me think of that scene in Talladega Nights with Will Ferrell, where he's praying to the baby Jesus, and he even has his prayers sponsored by different food and beverage companies because of how ridiculous these things become. And so that is the essence of what we're getting at here, is just this idea of it's not about who hears what you're saying. It's about God. And all of our devotional practices are about God. And this is where we as a church have to also be a little careful, because there's a famous story about Martin Luther. And I think it was even depicted in the latest movie about his life. And that is when he went to Rome in 1513 as a pilgrimage. One of the things he did was climb the steps that Jesus took when he was on trial under Pontius Pilate. If you don't know the story, so they actually moved those steps, or what people think are those steps, from Jerusalem to Rome. They did this like sometime in the Middle Ages or something like that. It was, so I think it was a mother of one of the rulers did this. And so you could go and you could climb these steps. I think you can still do it today. I've never been to Rome. And one day, hopefully I will. And every step you take, you are supposed to say a prayer. And so you see these pilgrims going to Rome would crawl up these steps, and every step say a prayer. And the idea was that once you got to the top, whatever you were praying for, God would do. And primarily, what was being promised here was that you could free somebody from purgatory, or shorten one's stay, or you could lessen your own time in purgatory. Now, as Lutherans, we don't believe in purgatory. We don't believe that there's this idea of a place we go and wait before we are allowed, while we are purified before we get into heaven. That's a Roman Catholic believe. But we as Lutherans also have been guilty of promising things that we can't always deliver. And the problem is, and the reason why I bring up this story is that when Martin Luther did this act, he got to the top and he said, how do I know it's real? How do I know that what I just did has any meaning at all? And I think that the reason why he had those doubts is that, at least in the Middle Ages, they had made it about something other than God. They made it about this whole other idea that you had to do it in order to save yourself or to save somebody, a loved one. Instead of, I'm doing this because I love God. And there's so many things that we can do because we love God. And that should be the focus of why we do devotional acts. We go to church not out of a sense of guilt or a sense of obligation because if we don't, we're going to go to hell or something like that. These things, these devotional acts that we do to show our love for God should not be done out of fear, should not be done out of guilt, but they need to be emphasized as being out of love. And that's, as church leaders, we have to remind people of that this isn't about escaping and getting from hell or getting fire insurance, is what I like to call it. But it is about doing things out of love for God. Just as we don't go to the food pantry out of guilt of ourselves, but out of our love for our neighbor. And this is an important thing to remember because it changes our entire attitude around these things. Because you have a sense of joy that you can get out of something when you do it out of love versus when you do it out of guilt or fear. And it's, I think, our responsibility to remind people that devotional acts are about love of God and all the wonderful blessings that God has given each and every one of us. And I think that that's what Jesus wants us to do too, is to remind ourselves that we do these things not because we want to look great or we want to save ourselves from hell, but we do it because we love God. And if we're not doing it because we love God, then we got to really look at ourselves and we need to talk to our church leaders. We need to really understand what is going on within us and that maybe that we can learn to love again. Amen.